I grew up in northern Minnesota, where fishing is more than a hobby. It's a way of life. My dad taught me to cast a line before I could even ride a bike, and some of my best memories are of early mornings on the water, the mist rising off the lake and the world feeling quiet and safe. But there's one memory I can't shake, and it's the reason I haven't fished alone since I was 16. It was late June, the start of summer break, and I'd convinced my dad to let me take the old aluminum boat out by myself for the first time. Lake Arrowhead was only a few miles from our house, surrounded by thick pine forest and dotted with little islands. Most of the locals fished the main channel, but I liked the quiet coves on the far side, where the water was still, and the only sounds were the loons and the wind in the trees. I set out just after sunrise, my tackle box rattling at my feet, and a thermos of coffee in my backpack. The lake was empty except for a pair of kayakers in the distance. I rowed to my favorite spot, a narrow inlet shaded by overhanging branches, and dropped anchor. The water was glassy, the air cool and fresh. I cast my line and settled in, feeling like I had the whole world to myself. After an hour or so, I noticed something strange, a ripple on the surface moving against the current. At first I thought it was a muskrat or a big fish, but the shape was wrong. It was long and dark, gliding just beneath the water, too big to be anything I'd ever seen in the lake. I watched it for a while, trying to convince myself it was just a log drifting in the current. Then it disappeared, and the cove went silent. Even the birds stopped singing. I felt a chill, but I told myself I was being paranoid. I reeled in my line and cast again, trying to focus on the rhythm of fishing. A few minutes later, I heard a splash behind me. I turned and saw ripples spreading out from the shore, as if something had just slipped into the water. I scanned the trees but saw nothing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I started to pack up, suddenly eager to get back to the main channel. As I reached for the oars, I heard a low guttural sound, almost like a growl, coming from the trees. I froze, heart pounding, listening. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by the crack of a branch. I grabbed the oars and started rowing, my hands shaking. As I pulled away from the cove, I glanced back and saw something standing at the water's edge. A tall, thin figure, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were dark, almost hollow, and it watched me with a hunger that made my blood run cold. I rowed faster, not daring to look back again. When I reached the main channel, the sun was higher, and the world felt normal again. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a deer or a bear, but I knew better. I never told my dad what I saw, and I never went back to that cove. A few years later, I heard a story from an old-timer at the bait shop. He said there was a legend about Lake Arrowhead, a creature that lived in the shadows, only coming out when the mist was thick and the world was quiet. He said it watched the fishermen, waiting for someone to be alone. I don't know what I saw that morning, but I still dream about those hollow eyes, and the feeling that something is always watching from the edge of the water. My Uncle Mike is a lifelong fisherman, the kind of guy who can spend 12 hours on the water and call it a good day, even if he doesn't catch a thing. He lives on the Gulf Coast of Texas, and every summer, my family would visit for a week of fishing, shrimp boils, and stories around the fire. Most of his tales were about big catches or wild storms, but there's one story he only told once, late at night, after a few too many beers. It's the reason he never fishes alone after dark anymore. It was the summer of 2009, and Mike had decided to try his luck at the old stone jetty that juts out into the bay. The locals said the best fishing was just after midnight, when the tide was high and the water was alive with movement. Mike packed his gear, grabbed a lantern, and headed out just as the sun was setting. The jetty was deserted, the only sounds the distant crash of waves and the occasional call of a gull. Mike set up near the end, casting his line into the deep water. The night was warm, the air thick with salt and the smell of seaweed. For a while, everything was peaceful, just the steady rhythm of casting and reeling, the lantern flickering in the breeze. Around 1 a.m., Mike noticed something odd. The water near the rock started to swirl, as if something big was moving just below the surface. He figured it was a school of mullet or maybe a big redfish, so he cast his line right into the middle of the swirl. As soon as the bait hit the water, something yanked the rod so hard it nearly pulled him off his feet. Mike fought to keep his balance, the line screaming off the reel. Whatever was on the other end was strong, stronger than anything he'd ever hooked before. He braced himself, digging his heels into the slick stones, and tried to reel it in. That's when he saw it. A pale, human-like hand breaking the surface, fingers long and webbed, reaching for the rocks. Mike froze, the rod slipping from his hands. The hand disappeared, replaced by a face. White, with wide, unblinking eyes and a mouth that opened far too wide. It stared at him for a moment, then vanished beneath the waves. Mike stumbled back, heart pounding, nearly dropping his lantern. The water went still, the swirling gone. He grabbed his gear and started back down the jetty, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. As he reached the shore, he heard a splash behind him. He turned and saw the pale face again, just above the surface, watching him with those empty eyes. He ran to his truck, locked the doors, and didn't look back. For days after, he had nightmares about that face, about the hand reaching for him from the dark water. He told a few friends, but most just laughed it off, saying he'd had too much to drink or let his imagination get the best of him. But Mike never fished the jetty at night again. He says sometimes when the tide is high and the moon is full, he'll see something moving in the water, just out of the corner of his eye. He doesn't know what it is and he doesn't want to find out. Now, whenever I visit, I notice he always packs up before sunset, no matter how good the fishing is. And every time I walk past the jetty, I remember his story and the warning in his voice. Don't fish alone after dark. You never know what's waiting just beneath the surface. I spent most of my 20s working odd jobs and moving from state to state. But one thing that never changed was my love for fishing. It was my way to unwind, to feel like I belonged somewhere, even if just for a few hours. In the summer of 2015, I was living in a small town in western Kentucky, renting a cheap apartment near the Green River. The river was wide and slow, with muddy banks and thick woods on either side. Locals said it was good for catfish, especially at night. One Friday after a long week at work, I grabbed my rod and a bucket of bait and headed down to my favorite spot, a bend in the river where the water was deep and the trees hung low over the bank. The sun was setting as I set up, the air buzzing with mosquitoes and the distant sound of frogs. I cast my line and settled in, enjoying the peace and quiet. It was almost midnight when I heard footsteps crunching through the brush behind me. I tensed up, gripping my flashlight, but relaxed when I saw it was just another fisherman. A tall, thin man in a faded baseball cap and a dirty flannel shirt. He nodded at me and set up a few yards down the bank, not saying a word. We fished in silence for a while, the only sounds the plop of bait hitting the water and the occasional splash of a fish. After a while, I tried to make small talk, asking if he'd had any luck. He just shook his head, never looking up from his line. Something about him made me uneasy. He moved stiffly, almost mechanically, and his face was always in shadow. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my own line, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Around 1 a.m., I hooked a big catfish. As I reeled it in, I glanced over and saw the man watching me, his eyes glinting in the beam of my headlamp. He smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that sent a chill down my spine. "Nice catch," he said, his voice low and raspy. I mumbled a thanks, suddenly eager to leave. I packed up my gear, keeping an eye on him the whole time. As I started up the path toward my car, I heard him following, his footsteps crunching in the dark. I picked up the pace, heart pounding, but he kept coming, never falling behind. I reached the parking lot and fumbled with my keys, glancing back to see him standing at the edge of the trees, just watching. I got in my car and locked the doors, breathing hard. As I pulled out, my headlights swept across the lot, and he was gone. No sign of him, no sound, just the empty riverbank and the dark woods. The next day, I told a coworker what happened. He went pale and asked me to describe the man. When I did, he shook his head. "You saw him too," he said. "People around here call him the Riverbank Stranger. Folks say he's been seen for decades, always at night, always alone. Some say he's just a drifter, others say he's something else. But everyone who has met him says the same thing. Don it, let him follow you home. I never fished that spot again. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, I catch a glimpse of a man in a flannel shirt standing by the side of the road watching as I pass. I don't know who or what he is, but I know I'll never forget that smile and the feeling that I was lucky to make it home at all.